My childhood ended when I was 4 years old. And because of that, I never grew up. So I just always thought I could get away with anything. I was constantly stepping in dog turds and wondering why my shoes stank. Literally. I was never like a bad dude, and I was never good with the chicks. I didn't get very good grades, and I was pretty lame with sports, at least back then. And I was always unhappy with things being just okay, normal. I never liked that. It was boring. So to keep things interesting, what I did was crazy shit few people, maybe no one, would ever try. I mean, really crazy shit. And now, to get a sense for this attitude of mine, you had to grow up in the crazy Rodriguez household. Like the first time I got drunk. I mean, shit-faced, can't walk straight or at all, drunk. I was 4. My brother Remus, the oldest brother, was 15 at the time, and my next oldest brother, Romulus, were raised to think they were the second coming. My parents came back here from Mexico with so many baby and little kid pictures of them, they had to keep them in boxes in the garage. My mother was white and from up here, and so she went down there and met the old man in Mexico City. So there was that whole thing, you know. You hear about it with other ethnicities, but not so much about growing up brownish, you know, never white enough for the white people or brown enough for the brown folks. And then there was that whole Catholic school, public school thing where I'd spend my days sitting in classrooms next to the middle class kids, you know, parents were dentists and doctors and real estate agents. And then I'd come home at night and play with kids who, you know, maybe had holes in their shoes. So there were all these schizodynamics going on. And then there was that insane household I grew up in. 1 bathroom, 2 bedrooms, my grandmother sleeping on a Murphy bed where the dining room should have been. And my 3 brothers, they shared a bunk bed with Remus, of course, on top, and Romulus and the next oldest underneath. Me? I slept in a crib in my parents' room till I was 6. True story. I was a baby, all right, but after my parents had lost their firstborn, a little girl at 29 days, little Anna, they'd about had it with sons by the time I came along. My father got up early, but he was diabetic, so we had the same breakfast every morning. So even though we didn't see him, we could always smell where he'd been. My mother, incapable of talking without her teeth clenched together, would bark out orders like some overseer trying to control a bunch of rowdy cowboys just to get us off to school on time. From there, it was a day of the nuns, where I was one of like 3 Chicano students in a classroom full of 40 mostly white students. And I don't know how or why, but somehow very early on, the nuns handed me the whipping boy jacket. So being a good Catholic kid, I put it on. Now it had its perks. It's come in very handy throughout my life. Everywhere I've gone, I was always the undisputed class clown. It helps, you know, as an actor, you know, that can come in handy depending. But it was like that everywhere, even in law school, where, you know, it's not an easy trick to do. Being the funny guy in a classroom full of butt-faced law students and ass-white professors and pulling it off, yeah, that was the funny guy. So after a day of the nuns, it was back home on the farm to another night of the craziness back there. Accusing, berating, belittling, condemning, comparing, finger pointing, fault finding, screaming, yelling, shouting. It never stopped. Never. The 2 oldest siblings walked on water, so most of the brunt came my way. Not all of it, but most of it. My reaction to all of this was to be totally hyper and crying all the time over anything. Kill all the humans you want, but when they shot a cow on combat so the hungry soldiers could eat, I cried my eyes out. 11 o'clock news came on, I was still bawling. Morning after a hard rain, the neighbor ladies would want us to step on snails so they wouldn't congregate around their plants and eat them. Every time I stepped on one of those poor little snails, I felt like a part of me was dying. I told them I didn't want to do it, but they made me. The other kids didn't seem to have a problem with that. I think some even enjoyed it. But those poor snails crunching under my feet sickened me. I was a real animal lover, especially cats. I couldn't tell you how many sick, injured, lost, stray animals I've saved over the years. But then I grew up to become a bullfighting nut. Go figure. And they couldn't keep me still if they strapped me in a chair, though they tried. My parents kept me in this playpen I couldn't get out of. And it had this little mat, this kind of pad that supposedly was supposed to cover the bottom, but it was torn and ripped and never quite fitted, no matter how I would move it. And I was crying all the time, so whenever my little feet would fall through the slats and I'd get stuck, you couldn't tell something was wrong because I was crying all the time. Yeah, that was my life there. Like, I don't know, that playpen was like my prison, my jail cell. You know, I couldn't get out and no one would let me out, no matter how hard I cried. Didn't matter, as long as I wasn't bouncing off the walls, driving everyone crazy like some spinning gyroscope. In that pen I stayed, spinning around all day long.